Ken Hope. Has the coalition government had a successful first 100 days?
Let's see if we can get some agreement on this. Has the coalition government had a successful first 100 days? Alex?
Well, I think it's slightly odd that we measure this 100 days, especially because UK governments, I mean, in the US, you sort of say 100 days because they come in, at the beginning of the year and then they work for 100 days. We come in for 100 days in May and then they all go to Tuscany. I don't know whether they've actually done anything yet. It seems to me that, I think at the moment there is actually quite a lot of support for the coalition government. It seems to me that there's a general understanding among the population that that we're kind of understanding that cuts need to be made and things like that, and that's going forward. It seems to me that nothing really has actually happened yet, and we're really going to have to wait for these spending reviews and so on to come in before we can form any sort of judgment.
All right, the jury's out for you. Maajid Nawaz, has the coalition had a successful first 100 days?
Well, I think perhaps I speak for a lot when I say that everyone's surprised how well the Lib Dems are getting along with the Conservatives. And Clegg and Cameron seem to be getting along better than Blair and Brown were when they were in those positions, which is very interesting. But
you and Douglas are getting along better than Blair and Brown.
We do get along. No, I must say we get along in person. I think we do, Douglas. But onto the issue. I think there are three, as somebody was discussing with me recently, there are three entities emerging, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. There's the coalition government on the one hand. Then there's the rank and file of the Conservatives and the rank and file of the Lib Dems. And they aren't necessarily the same thing. Those involved in the coalition are developing day by day a stronger consensus on many issues. In fact, it's hard to find where there is disagreement, even though I think I've got some if anyone wants to ask about that. But I think that within the rank and file of both parties, there are some sort of disgruntled people complaining about how well they are getting along. And I heard somebody, one of the Lib Dem members actually in an interview, and he said something which perhaps does ring true. And he said, well, the media, if we are fighting like Blair and Brown were, then everyone complains that we're bickering, and we get along and everyone complains that we're not arguing. So I suppose we can't have it both ways.
Welcome to journalism. Ruth Teach.
Well, I think the Tories have certainly had a jolly good first 100 days. I'm not so sure about the Lib Dems. I think their rank and file are feeling much more worried about it than the Tories are. Of course they get on well because they're all public school in Oxford or Cambridge, so that's just fine. And they're a bit like a newly married couple. It really is the honeymoon period. And I think a couple of things may happen that will upset it. I think a dynamic will start when Labour chooses their next leader, because then there will be, as it were, the other man or possibly the other woman out there looking quite attractive. And it might be a feature when Labour chooses their new leader, for that new leader to try and worm his way in and split apart that happily married couple. And I think the coalition might well come to bits in the end, certainly before the next election, so that one part of it carries the blame, for example, the Tories, rather than the other. I also think it's deeply undemocratic. I cannot get over the fact that a party that did less well than it did in the last election, even though its leader did jolly well on television, they did less well. They've got 57 MPs, that they are calling the shots. I find that absolutely extraordinary, and that's one of the reasons I wouldn't want to change the voting system. I think it's really bad that there is the potential for a small party, maybe even smaller, to hold the balance. That does worry me. So we'll see what happens, but at the moment it still is the honeymoon period, though I don't feel that it's awfully good. It is a bit like a forced marriage, isn't it?
Douglas Murray.
Well, I'm an equal opportunities person on this. I hate all the parties equally. And think that the fact that they spent the run-up to the general election pretending to the British people that they had huge differences, and then after the general election it turned out any of them could get into bed with any of the others, tells us a lot about the fakes and frauds who are trying to stand for Parliament and lead the country these days. These are extraordinarily strange times politically for Britain, because we don't really have opposition of any particular kind, we don't have any particular ideologues or idealism of any kind. It's a type of managerialism. And if Mr Clegg and Mr Cameron turn out they can run the country a bit better than the last guy, then we'll get them in power. I think this is a terrible problem. Look, Gordon Brown did the best job he could at trying to wreck this country. You've got to give it to him. It was a pretty good stab at it. Anyone other than Mr Brown knew that after him you had to mop up, you had to cut, you had to do all sorts of things that would stop our grandchildren and great-grandchildren having to pay off the deficit, which he'd run up even further. Everyone knew this. So what's happened in the first 100 days is the beginning of the process of mopping up after the Brown nightmare. It hasn't begun, to my mind, as well as it should have done. I think that we need leaders in this country who are going to explain much more clearly and much more carefully to us what is going to have to be cut and why. And I don't think people have any idea yet of the financial problem that this country is in, because our leaders haven't explained it well enough, and they haven't explained what they're going to have to do well enough. But we do need a political leadership through this period. I'm glad that they've done some of the things they've done. It is very early to tell, too early to tell, and we will simply have to watch and see at what point this marriage of convenience splits apart, because after the Brokeback Coalition, as they say, wait for the gay divorce.
And our next question, please.
Carol Haig, should we donate to the current Pakistan crisis to the detriment of UK charities?
Well, Ruth Deeth, you touched on this. Should we donate to the current Pakistan crisis to the detriment of UK charities, is the question.
Well, my heart goes one way and my head goes another. My heart says no, absolutely not, because of what we all know that has happened to funds donated in the past. It is also the case, I think I read today, that the group that bombed Mumbai not long ago have said we don't want money from the West, we don't want money from infidels. And a former Prime Minister, I think, of Pakistan said we don't need your help. And I worry over that lovely young doctor, Dr. Wu, who was killed in Afghanistan, and before that, Margaret Hassan. Terrible things have happened to Westerners who have tried to help in person, never mind the money. It is also the case that Pakistan has, I believe, a nuclear weapon. If they can afford that, you wonder why the floods cannot be controlled in that way. I've also read that very few Middle Eastern countries have given any money to Pakistan. The oil revenue amounts to £1.4 billion a day. If every oil-receiving country decided to give 1 day's income, the problems would be close to being solved. And it's very interesting that the two countries that I think Pakistan is not very keen on, namely the US and the UK, are the ones who have rushed forward to give aid. To Saudi Arabia and Kuwait have given a little. But there's been a stunning silence from all around the world. And frankly, I am not surprised. We're being told all the time that our help is not wanted, our aid people are badly treated, there doesn't seem to be a lack of money. So my heart says no, but my head says if we don't do it, it may leave a vacuum for terrorist groups. If we do it, it might be that we can persuade Pakistan and the less attractive elements in it that no, there isn't a war against Islam, that we embrace everybody in the same way. So it's a tug between head and heart, and I think it should be an individual matter, actually, rather than government. There are about 1 million people of Pakistani origin living in this country. They could lead the way. So I'm a bit torn over this.
Douglas Murray.
I agree, it is a difficult one. I'd put it this way, though. I mean, we have seen, there have been many reports back in the last few days of extremist groups stepping into the vacuum that Ruth quite rightly described. And this is sadly something that has happened elsewhere in the region, not far away in Lebanon and indeed in Gaza. It is extremist groups like, in those cases, Hezbollah and Hamas, who come forward after disasters, after humanitarian problems, and provide money. It's a very, very good way to buy people into the idea that your particular sectarian vision of the world is the best one. It's very hard to pull yourself away from an extreme movement like Hezbollah if you were born in a Hezbollah hospital, went to a Hezbollah school, and so on. So actually natural disasters like this in Pakistan can sadly be exactly the moment that extremists step in and start to buy up support. So we have to, yes, we should be supporting, we should be sending aid, as we are, as America is. Yes, we should be doing that, but we have to be extremely careful that it goes into the right hands. Because what tends to happen in these occasions is that people, very well-meaning people in well-meaning countries all around the world, send money in and it falls through people's hands like water. And we have to make sure that these things are chased up upon.
Maajid Nawaz.
Well, I think that it's more of a question of whether, in principle, we're in favour of donating money generally to charities abroad over charities at home. I don't think Pakistan should be singled out in that regard.
Well, forgive me, but that's exactly what the questioner did, and I'd like you to address that.
Yes, so I think that to address, that's the point, that to single out Pakistan would be detrimental for the reasons that Douglas has mentioned, for the reasons that Ruth has mentioned. To single out Pakistan and say that one country doesn't deserve our support, whereas the Haiti earthquake crisis did, would be detrimental to both encouraging and allowing the extremists to fill that vacuum, to allow them to propagate further the rhetoric that Islam is at war with the West and vice versa. Currently, as we speak, the Sinn Féin of Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is the terrorist group that did the Mumbai attacks in India, their name is Jamaat ad-Dawa. They're organising relief aid. They were the most efficient in organising relief aid when the earthquake crisis hit Kashmir, and they are filling that void. And as Hezbollah did, as Hamas do, those organisations, by collecting and distributing charity, are able to recruit people to their cause. So to single out Pakistan would only strengthen their hand. And if we stop looking at this issue as a them and us, and some of the rhetoric coming from the panel is concerning for this reason, that we should not divide the world into the two spheres of Muslims versus everyone else. That does further re-emphasize the Al-Qaeda paradigm. We should rather look at these people as human beings who deserve support just as any other human being in times of crisis would deserve.
All right, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had quite a lot of rhetoric here on the panel tonight trying to divide the world into two, and actually, and then saying that we have to aid it so as not to do that seems kind of bizarre. Maybe we should get our own house in order first. It does strike me that, I mean, this week I think there was another US drone attack that killed about 12 people in the north of Pakistan. I think the American budget in Afghanistan is about $5 billion a month. I think we might actually have some chance of winning hearts and minds if we spent a tiny fraction of that on helping people who are obviously extremely poor, extremely unfortunate, and have obviously lost everything they had.
But the question, I suppose the word we is ambiguous. It could mean our government, or it could mean us as individuals. Should individuals donate to Pakistan to the detriment of UK charities?
Well, to the detriment of UK charities is obviously quite an emotive way to put it. Of course, I don't want UK charities to lose out at all, far from it. I would hope that people can dig into their pockets for some extra. I think people have been, actually, and I think Ruth said that Pakistanis should lead the way. I think they have been, actually. I think UK Pakistanis have been organising quite a lot for it. There are too many good causes in the world for us to be able to give money to them all. In terms of the government, though, I mean, our government, yes, Pakistan's government is certainly no model and has corruption problems, but we've been quite happy to sell them arms for a very long time.